First bill for our consideration is Senate Joint Resolution number 4. This is my bill and I will explain it. You all have heard quite a bit about it already, I think. School capital construction. Frankly, I've developed this bill. It's a rewrite of the constitutional amendment on school capital construction that the Senate passed in 2018. The House committee rejected it. I think they were under instructions, but anyhow, they wouldn't do anything with it. The need for the bill, I think, is twofold. First, we have funded the current system of school capital construction that the Supreme Court created basically with the Campbell 2 decision. Told us, starting with Campbell 1, that school capital construction was a state function, not a local one, which had been it always had been. Then in Campbell 2 told us that the legislature had to do it. The problems we got, as I said, twofold. First, we funded it with almost entirely, not quite, but close to entirely, with the coal lease bonus money. We aren't getting those coal lease bonuses anymore. And it's my judgment, frankly, that we will never see that sort of thing again on any scale. So we've got to do something else. We just can't fund the existing system. The second one is, as I told the Senate the other day, we have spent, including major maintenance, since the Campbell 2 decision, we have spent $3.9 billion on school capital construction. We've slowed down in recent years, but I think we'll pick up again, hearing the discussion of, gee, we need to replace all those buildings on some kind of a schedule for 60, 80-year replacement. Seeing the demands that are coming at that program. And frankly, I don't think we can afford that. And frankly, I think that the voters made better decisions on what the schools needed and what they didn't. I watched that for years. And at least the experience in our county, which was fairly average in assessed valuation, was that if the schools really needed something, they could get it and they would. And if they didn't, if they gold-plated it, the voters would reject it and the school district would have to come back with something that could sell. I will say, I think, although it may not have been in the stated legal reasoning, there was good reason for the Supreme Court to reject the system that we had, because you make the estimate, quarter to a third of the districts, there just wasn't the assessed valuation, sometimes not even within the constitutional 10% limitation on bonding, and sometimes it just cost the people too much. The Wyoming has got wild variations in assessed valuation per county. So I think that was a good part of the motivation for the court decision. Going through it, and constitutional amendment, you do write them different from statutes. You want something that will adapt to a wide variety of circumstances that might arise in the future. You want to put the basic principles in so that you can constitutionally do what you need to implement it. But you don't want to go into the administrative details. And I hope I've achieved that, and that's for you guys to judge and suggest changes if you think they're warranted. We're doing it. The lines 4 and 5 provide legislature provide by law for a system of public school capital construction subject to the following. First item, local school districts shall be primarily responsible for providing school facilities through bonds or other means. The or other means language is important. This is intended to be a bond issue system, but it is conceivable that the world's financial system will evolve in such a way that bonds don't make sense, and we'll want to go to some other financing means. And I want to be careful to allow for that without a constitutional amendment. There may be times when bonds are just irrational to use. The Supreme Court said that it was a state responsibility. This is going back to the old system that ran since statehood, where it was a local responsibility. And so this provision, single I, explicitly overturns the court decision. Item 2, decision of the voters election authorizing capital expenditures, however financed, again, accommodating alternate finance means, shall be final, and neither a school district nor the state may be required to fund any capital expenditure rejected by the voters. Look at the language very carefully here. The voter's decision is final. We can't be ordered by anybody, especially a court, to fund it in spite of the decision of the voters. We can go back to the voters in due course, but we can't be ordered by somebody else to finance it. May be required. That gives latitude so that we can do some of the things. If they reject a new school that's needed, we in the district can put in portables and do that sort of thing to accommodate until we get a cut down version that the voters will accept. You know, they reject, sometimes reject things because the design was ultra expensive and gold plated and was something that the electorate did not like about it. But you may have to accommodate things in the meantime. That's why you have that language the way it is. We can't be compelled, but the legislature and the school district can do what has to be done that's sensible, that's a lesser remedy that gets us by until they can get square with their electorate. Okay, here is the equalization. Cost of paying bonds and interest shall be equalized so that the needed district mill levy does not exceed what the mill levy would be if the district had the state average per person assessed valuation. Now, think about what we're doing there. We're equalizing it on a per capita basis with assessed valuation. So if you're, say, in a district that doesn't have up to the state average, say Albany County, for an example, they would pay what the mill levy would be if they did have the state average assessed. And then the state will make up the difference. And we'll get to that. So it's an equalization on a per person basis rather than a per pupil basis or some other basis. And I think that gives you a workable equalization that can be calculated. Applicable federal census information being used to determine the number of persons. And it says applicable federal census information, which does give the legislature some latitude to specify which of the census numbers we use, likely to be the decennial census, but sometimes things rapidly change. And the census does put out other estimates, and that could be authorized. Senator Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry to interrupt the
No,
explanation.
I welcome the interruption.
Well, it's an odd interruption. It's actually because our pages are numbered 2, then 4, which makes me struggle with page 3 as it doesn't exist.
Oh,
Do I need to go down and get?
yes, because page 3 is simply
I just
3.
realized that in my set that I don't have.
Yeah.
three, So I'll be right back.
3 is
Yeah.
one of the 4 most important pages in this
I'll
bill.
be right back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're fine passing it.
It's a trust me page.
Thank you for finding that. The copy, I don't know what happened. The copy I had last night that I
Yeah.
worked things up on had page 3.
Yeah, when I looked at this before, whatever copy I had page 3 also. But this one, and I didn't bring down any other ones, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Thank you for catching that quicker.
It's Friday.
Yeah.
Not nearly as funny as well.
Okay, let me finish up with this one
Yeah,
that's in
absolutely.
in front of us while we're at it. So we're using the federal census information, and there is some flexibility there to specify the way this is written, which of the federal census information we use. And that could be important if you have a wild population swing in the middle of the decennial period. And then the next sentence is equalization may be provided for capital construction financed by other means. Again, trying to hold open the possibility of using a different financing mechanism and giving the legislature the latitude to be sensible on whether it's something that should be equalized or not. It might be if bonds become impossible, we might use a sales tax. That would be an obvious possibility. And that we would want to equalize. We might want to equalize it on a slightly different basis. We actually might still use some complicated formula that depended on the property assessed valuation. But that would be something that we'd have flexibility on. Also, this gives the flexibility where there is minor capital construction. Say you need to build a small garage or tool shed, or some of the rural schools have a teacherage, a double wide or single wide. That could be just financed out of operating costs without having to go to the expense of the bond issue and not worry about the equalization. You want to leave it open to the flexibility of doing some things that way. And this is intended to accommodate that as well. We're now stuck with the problem of no page 3.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. There's one point that I wanted to raise on Romanet
Sure.
3, so
Sure.
we've got Romanet 3, let's talk about it. Mr. Chairman, the equalization is a one-way equalization as structured. And what I mean by that is if you're in a low assessed valuation district like mine, this is going to raise you up. If you're in a high assessed valuation district like Campbell County, you're going to have a disproportionate advantage over the mean, if that makes sense. So we'll say arbitrarily, if it would be 4 mills in my district, because, well, let's say I'd need 8 mills. The normalization takes me to 4 mills. In Campbell County, I need 2 mills. I only have to pay 2 mills. So it's a half equalization as structured. And I wanted to ask about that and discuss it.
That is very true. Yeah. I thought about, you could get some very complicated recapture formulas. We do in the operating,
Yes,
where everybody's paying. all
right.
the time.
That's a full bi-directional equalization on that one.
Yeah, I chose not to go that route in part because there is some burden in having all those things that are producing. The two mills, they demand various services, they do some things to the community. And I thought, well, the ongoing operating thing, we do have equalized. And this is a benefit to the districts that are the poor ones, brings them up. I don't mind having, for part of our system, having an advantage, having the higher assessed valuation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This is gonna help.
Mr. Chairman, we cannot hear you on YouTube or Zoom.
It does strike me that having a piece of the system that works that way to give the higher assessed valuation is a reasonable outcome. And I think one the voters can understand. I think it'll help us sell the thing with the electorate. So that's my judgment. We've equalized a number of things. We've not equalized a number of things. It's a mixed system, and this contributes to that.
Mr. Chairman. Speaking on behalf of a low assessed valuation, and I'd be interested to hear others that do. These are the types of inequities that frustrate the heck out of us. The fact that, for example, because we weren't blessed being over massive amounts of coal, oil, or gas, our community gets about 1/3 of the total revenue for county and municipal use as the community that would then further benefit from this. So that they already have roughly 3 times the local revenue that we have. And in a circumstance where they have to fund their school, that rich poor gap, so to speak, among our counties and cities grows even further, which really was, at the heart of the original concerns here, is that we're not even in the same ballpark when it comes to capacities. It's a 10 to 20x difference between our low end and our high end, particularly in bad times versus good times kinds of concepts. And we see that. We just had the discussion on Gillette Community College, for example, where they're perfectly comfortable having a small fraction of the standard, where everywhere else the standard mills are woefully insufficient, require us to pay over 50% of the cost of operation for the college. And in Campbell County, I think it was 1.9 mills. I can't remember where we ended up estimating it. So I understand that this resolves it in one direction, but if the intent is to get this past voters, mine aren't going to vote for this.
That you would have more votes down there than you think, because your county does benefit from it because of the equalization up. I think if you do it with a complicated recapture formula, and it would have to be complicated, I think, you will lose massively in the election. Campbell County, Sweetwater County, Sublette County, Teton County, And maybe, I don't know that there are any more that are that disadvantaged. You might lose part of Lincoln County too. And make it very difficult to pass the constitutional amendment. So this was the route I chose. You're welcome to try to amend it for something different if you want.
Understood. Thanks.
Any other questions so far? Okay, proceeding, now that we have, the next item is equalization. Financing the equalization may include appropriations, dedicated sources of funds. You know, we could suppose devise, put some royalties in here. We could there's any number of other things you could. The mind is full of fertile imaginations and how funds can be diverted into something like this. We can straight out do it with appropriation. And shall, not may, shall include, if necessary, statewide mill levy to assure payment of the equalization. I don't like that last provision, but I think it is absolutely essential that if you're going to sell bonds, any responsible bond counsel is want to see the guaranteed repayment. And so the equalization has to be not subject to the whim of legislative appropriation, but guaranteed. And this would enable it to be set basically the way the counties now set the mill levy to repay any other kind of bond. It's a complicated exercise. It's mathematical. It's a ministerial exercise. It doesn't have to be done by elected officials. So that's why that's there the way it is. Compliance with the debt limitation imposed by Article 16, Section 5, which is 10% of the assessed valuation, shall be determined using only the school district's share of the payment for the debt. So that's the way you preserve the spirit and the letter of the constitutional debt limitation, and yet enable a district with low valuation to construct the facilities they need. We could have gone and modified the debt limitation. I thought that would be largely misunderstood and kill the bill in the election. So I chose this route. I think it's consistent with both the letter and the spirit of 16.5, but it makes it very clear that what counts is the local share. So, and then the final provision, the two further provisions. Means shall be provided to decide which facilities are not needed for education, not subject to equalization. We have that concept already in the law, the stuff that you have to fund locally entirely. You do the classic case I've seen is in our county, the auditorium at Natrona County High School was built with a school bond issue in the 20s. They had the devil paying it off in the 30s, but they got it done. And it is a benefit to the school, but it is also a tremendous benefit to the community. Community needed an auditorium. That sort of thing will arise. And this gives latitude to deal with that and deal with it legislatively, where we can change the law if the first try didn't work very well. Because you may have some devices for sharing percentages, and there's all kinds of ways you can handle it. And deciding what really is a swimming pool, something the community's got to pay for separately, or something that thought to be at least a partial equalization. Item 6, legislature may appropriate funds to relieve hardship. That's kind of a catch-all. It is a may, but it gives us the latitude as a legislature to be sensible You get a tornado, eliminates a school that's freshly built, and the voters are already on the hook to pay for the school that was destroyed, and we're basically self-insured. We can deal with that, fire, a circumstance. There's all kinds of circumstances that could arise. So I think that's useful. And then you get the ballot statement, which I think is strictly truthful. Cite the Campbell decision and what happened. We had previously provided the school facility previously been local and financed through local bond issues. Our system doesn't work anymore because our funding source disappeared. And then a sentence that I think is truthful, think of it yourselves. Legislature also reports the new system has been expensive because the legislature is not as good a judge of the need for local school facilities as the voters of the school districts. Bluntly saying, the voters will do it better than we do. And I think that's true. And then you go into amendment, turn it to a local system. How it's equalized, provision intended to provide fairness, enable districts low property values to construct needed facilities, and also authorize but not require legislature to appropriate additional funds for hardship. You know, we could add some more detail, but if you make it too long, people won't read it. This is a ballot statement, so that's why it's written the way it is. That one is identical with the one that passed in 2018. That's the amendment. I'd be happy to take any questions about it, and then we'll go to the audience for public testimony. Seeing no questions, is there anybody here present that wants to testify on this? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association, speaking in opposition to the joint resolution. Mr. Chairman, I think the reality is that our current system provides for equity. Equity for all Wyoming school children to have a same opportunity for educational experiences. This system leads to inequity. Mr. Chairman, I think the legislature had an opportunity prior to the Campbell decisions at equalization, yet did not do so. That just didn't work out. So what's in here is kind of a hope that the legislature will come up with a system of equalization, but does not provide that system of equalization itself. You know, I think this might be different, Mr. Chairman, if we were starting on a level playing field. If all school districts across the state of Wyoming had their facility needs met. But it's clearly not an even playing field right now. If we look at that $3.9 billion that has been spent on capital construction that you referenced, and we look proportionate to the number of students, Natrona County has clearly been the greatest beneficiary of that receipt of dollars on that per student basis. The needs in Fremont County are clear. The needs in Laramie County are clear. We have certainly needs across our state that continue. And so we're not starting from a place where all districts are equal. Mr. Chairman, I think one of the concerns, again, that we have in this is that the state obligation does not have to rely on coal lease bonuses. There certainly are other opportunities for the state to meet its obligation. Your fellow legislators, fellow senators have talked about some of those options. Members that are no longer part of your body have made other suggestions for how to finance school capital construction, ways that we had relied on in the past that perhaps we could go back to and maintain a statewide system. Mr. Chairman, I do take issue with the description in section 2. I don't believe that it is fully accurate. I think it's an opinionated statement of what the resolution does. There is one glaring piece that is missing from that section 2, and that is the statement that the legislature shall include a statewide mill levy. This mandates a tax. The legislature must tax. And I think if that's going to be a part of the joint resolution, it should be a part of the statement that goes to voters. Mr. Chairman, I don't know that I'm going to convince you otherwise, or perhaps we just respectfully disagree, but I believe that the statewide system is the fairest system, and that the local system creates the inequities that Senator Rothfuss talked about, the inequities that we'd experienced in the past, manifested just in different ways through this system, as opposed to the statewide system that does provide for equity. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be open to your questions.
Questions? Cinderella?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I go back and forth on this issue because I understand what you're saying. In looking at Laramie County, we are a large school district. We have a lot of buildings. My kids are in a building that was built in the 40s or 50s. And so when I hear about this, well, it's equitable now. I mean, I heard from Teton County that a middle school that was built, I never attended it. It was a new building when I was in school there. That's on the list, might need to be torn down and rebuilt. And so when we talk about this equity thing, it's a little academic. I think my biggest concern is when I look at what's happening in my community is Cheyenne's going to grow. We're right next to the Front Range. Our projected growth is exciting. It's a good problem for our community to have. But my challenge then as a legislator is to go convince all of my colleagues from around the state that we need some kind of tax to support that. And it's really divorced from that local control. And I understand that. They don't see crowding in schools. Their communities don't get the benefit of using those facilities. And so that's the rub, is what are we going to do in Cheyenne if there is a lack of desire? And I understand it from my colleagues from around the state in raising property tax, for example, when their communities won't ever see the benefit of it. They'll have the benefit of knowing that our kids have schools. But that's, I think, the issue that we're trying to address. And so, you know, aside from, so help me sort through that. Do you have an idea of how Cheyenne can address its building needs and its capacity needs in the future?
Mr. Chairman, you know, I think the problems that exist with our statewide system is that the list has become a political list. I don't know that foregoing the statewide responsibility is the way to change a political list. If the list can be based on objective criteria and politics stays out of the list, then I think you do have those prioritizations that can be addressed on an equitable approach. You know, from school district sides, there's nothing more frustrating than having your building on the list at number 5, and then a year later it's number 40. That shouldn't happen. That list should be consistent. And so I think that work is primarily the work of the state construction department through the school facilities division to come up with that appropriate and equitable means of addressing the needs of our state. So I do agree that we ought to depoliticize the list and then recognize the state's obligation. I also think that taxpayers become frustrated when they see their dollars going to something else that they don't think benefits them. If my dollars go to benefit someone who has needs that I don't, then that could be frustrating in the same basis. I think it's part of the function of government to distribute those dollars where they're needed, and for the individual to understand it's the function of government to provide for the needs of the state, not for just my needs.
And just to follow up, Brian, I think you're kind of proving my point. Because you talk about the list becoming politicized, and we hear that and you said it yourself, Natrona County fared pretty well during that boom of construction. And not surprisingly, if you looked at the composition of who was on Appropriations Committee, who sits on school facilities, it's had a very heavy presence of Natrona County. And I understand, that's how things go. I've expressed this to leadership, at least within the Senate, that with Laramie County growing like it does, it's baffling to me that we don't have a Laramie County legislator on the School Facilities Commission. So I just want to say, I don't know how you depoliticize something that's inherently political. So that's what this is trying to do, is get away from that. And then on the other piece of it that I'm struggling with is even looking within my own district, and this is where Cheyenne is different than your smaller communities where you have one elementary, one middle school, one high school. We have dozens of elementary schools. We have 3 junior highs. We have 4 high schools. And if you live in Cheyenne, there are constant discussions about, is there favoritism for one triad over another? And if we added a 4th triad, what would that mean? Obviously, it wouldn't be called triad anymore. But my point is, I hear these complaints all the time in my community that one triad's getting more attention than another. And so, but then our tool and our mechanism for pushing back on that is a state system that is really divorced from that kind of local conversation. And so that's where I think that this is trying to put the community more in charge of understanding some of those nuances and giving the community the ability to say, we don't like that maybe one triad's being favored over another when it comes to facilities. And so that's, I think, what we're trying to get after is that true local control element. So that's where I am a little confused about the strong opposition from the School Boards Association. Is I think the state isn't the best responder to some of those uniquely political arguments that communities have. I think that those are better served by engaging more of our school board leaders to make these decisions when it comes to tax dollars. So what am I missing?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that you're missing the argument that Senator Rothfuss just presented, that it's not equal across the state. It's not the same for every community in its ability to build buildings. You are paying higher mills in one county versus another county to get the same building. And the local share becomes something that is inherently unequal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to briefly respond to Senator Ellis's question and get at something that Mr. Farmer's talking about. There are models that address both, that are constitutional and that honestly, funding just becomes the problem. But we've talked for years about changing it so that instead of having a top-down directive of this is a list, we, for example, had more of an ADM basis of dollars that accumulate in a capital construction pot for each district as time passes, and that district has the flexibility to utilize their resources as they see fit. That's going to be uniform because it's a state equalized distribution based on uniform revenue. And you could even add an election requirement for that, where you have to get approval by the voters to build a building or something along those lines, and they prioritize. It doesn't really matter at that point because you've equalized and the resources are available. I don't know what you do if they never passed a new school and they just let it accumulate forever. But again, I think the concerns that Senator Ellis is laying out about local challenges not being appropriately addressed at the statewide level, that's just absolutely the case. We struggle with that. We have on the School Facilities Committee for years. We've got a lot of things that we work through. My district suffers similarly in that, first of all, I think everybody probably appreciates my district would double its own taxes and build more schools, right? We did that. We chipped in $25 million to buy that pool, Mr. Chairman, and expand our science classrooms and all sorts of other things. despite our pathetic assessed valuation. And one of the challenges then with our current system is that we do hold back some districts to whatever the mean, so to speak, is, and others are raised up that are perhaps more recalcitrant in their interest in providing school CapCon. So it's not to say there aren't problems. I think we all agree, and I think Mr. Farmer and everybody in the room agrees that we have some challenges with carrying this out in the way that we'd like to see it, not just revenue, but the way it's implemented. We can address those. But just because the current system has some flaws, it doesn't make, I think, the approach that we're looking at equitable. And I think that's the concern that I have and laid out, is that, again, maybe this benefits me and maybe it's not a problem, but every time my district needed a new school, the next election would come around and we'd build a new school, right? Each time. I don't think we wouldn't have any problem. Go to Niobrara County arbitrarily, Lincoln County, I don't know, just pick your county. And given the same circumstances, given the same need, given overcrowding or capacity, that constituency might well make a different decision. We can see that in the legislature based on the folks that come to represent those constituents. We've got some folks representing their constituents that are going to say no a lot more than other folks like me in my districts and folks in Teton County. So, I mean, maybe I should just be for this and be strictly selfish and say, all right, this is going to help me, I'll get mine. I will, right? I mean, yeah, I'm not arguing on behalf of my district here. If I were, I would just say, all right, good, let's pass this constitutional amendment. My problems will be solved. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be an equitable system. And I do have an obligation, I think, to make sure that we're providing an equal opportunity for all the students in the state. And I realize we can write into the Constitution, you don't have to do that anymore. We get pretty powerful when we start working with the Constitution. But going back to what Mr. Farmer said, I do feel like we have an obligation which is broader than just the thou shalt that tells us to. I think we have a moral obligation to our students to do the right thing and to make sure that those kids in Niobrara get a school too when they need one. So I just wanted to weigh in on the fact that I am 100% behind Senator Ellis's concerns in terms of being able to carry out the objectives she lays out. And I would love to work with her on trying to find ways to address that.
Mr. Chairman, if I
I'm going to add one more thing that you can respond to. I think there's another problem that Cheyenne illustrates. This community is facing the potential of considerable growth with what's going on with the missile base. I think is a 10-year proposition, in addition to being close to the Front Range. Right now, you can't justify additional schools on the formulas because the growth is uncertain. That's a judgment that a community ought to be able to make for itself, that it's rational to build extra to accommodate the growth the community expects and hopes to achieve, and take the risk that it won't be achieved. The state really is not in a position to take those kind of risks, and you won't show up in the formulas and you can't override them because the political will won't be there. So that's an additional problem that this one would solve. I would say that I'll let it go. Let you respond to that. I would say it is an inherently political system, what we've got right now, because that's what the Supreme Court decreed. When you say the legislature is responsible, the legislature will behave like the legislature is supposed to and represent its constituencies. So,
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate Senator Rothfuss's comments because it reminded me of a request that I made as a school board member to the school facilities committee of the legislature, that local school districts be allocated dollars from the state, and then the local school district have the opportunity to decide how to spend those dollars. That was a decision that we asked for. And of course, the legislature chose not to do that. But that is an example of another mechanism where the state can generate that equalized revenue and then leave the decisions at the hands of the local school district, school boards to make those kinds of decisions. As far as our current system, it is intended to be non-political through the formulas of the school facilities division of the state construction department. There are formulas for capacity. There are formulas for condition. There are evaluations by expert engineers in the process that make those recommendations of school capacity, school condition, and suitability, the three components from the Campbell cases that are supposed to become then objective. So whether that's necessarily political versus what it could be is maybe a subject of debate.
Mr. Chairman.
Sandra Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, this is the frustration though. We've heard about condition, there's this formula, but it creates an incentive not to maintain buildings. Because if your boiler goes out in your school, you still have a higher priority on the list, or if you don't maintain certain kind of things, infrastructure like that. You stay high on the list if you don't fix it, but you're penalized if you do. You move down on the list because the conditions improved. And so it's this bizarre, we haven't created a system that encourages really responsible management of our buildings. And I don't want to believe that happens, but unfortunately I've heard that instance where people say, well, we hate to put any more money to this because it'll affect where we are on the list. And so that doesn't seem like a good system to me. And, I want to push back too about this notion of how equitable it is. It's not. On paper, maybe it looks to be equitable. You said it yourself. Maybe if we all started on equal footing, but we didn't. We didn't start on equal footing in the 90s. We're not on equal footing today. I don't think that's ever going to be achieved. But I'm reading that Campbell one case, and I know we like picking out one sentence here or there, but there's a discussion in here that talks about this notion of how we've allowed for enhancements. And it references a case called Skeen. I can't remember which state that's in, but I remember I read it about a month or two ago. And the caution is that you allow districts to provide for their own enhancements. You start raising the bar of what's expected for providing a proper education. So as we're starting to see school districts across our state providing for swimming pools, that's becoming the new norm. And this notion that we're going to keep treating it as an enhancement, at some point, some of these smaller districts that can't afford a pool are going to say, this isn't fair. And they're right, it's not fair. And so this notion that we've somehow created this beautiful system that's completely equitable, I disagree with that wholeheartedly, because that's changing and that's evolving. And so I think the sooner we recognize that, I don't know that we'll ever perfectly achieve equity. We just need to really grapple with what that word means, but I just want to say, I don't think we're there today at all. Our school buildings are wildly inequitable in different conditions across the state.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Again, the concern that Senator Ellis lays out is a good one, with the fact that we do have these unintended consequences of the way we structure a statewide system where we have siloed funding for new buildings, components, and major maintenance, and those funds are not fungible. And the nature of the system leads to some perverse incentives that I don't think they actually happen as often as we hear anecdotally, realistically, because we do have a lot of responsible people working, but there is no question that by being siloed, we have some problems. This gets back to Mr. Farmer's suggestion from many years ago to the School Facilities Committee and Department. He's a Mustang, a farmer in Trona County Mustang. So, you should respect, I think, that good advice there, even though it was in Laramie County, Mr. Chairman. The
Mr.
idea
Chairman.
there, if you consolidate and you have a distribution to each district, even if you still ensure that you've got the school facilities department to work with the small districts that don't have the expertise or capacity to get their job done. We've got about 5 districts in the state that manage a fleet like Senator Ellis is talking about of all of these schools. If you allow them to have a strategy that's a 20-year, 50-year strategy and optimize use of major maintenance and then have to go to kind of a higher level to buy a new building, you get rid of those perverse incentives. Those go away, which again is why Mr. Farmer asked for it and why I've been advocating for that. But again, it doesn't require a constitutional change to go there. That's all just statute.
I would say it also is not workable because of you're going to have inherently, in the way the state is, a whole bunch of small districts who could never accumulate enough to handle the big lump of a new high school or something like that. If we were a large metropolitan state in all metropolitan areas, it'd work. Otherwise, I don't think it does.
Mr. Chairman, quickly on that point. It works in concept over like an infinite time period. You would have to front and adjust to that as you needed new schools. You'd have to be able to kind of go deficit accounting. But it once again shows that if you get to the point where what you said is true and we've got schools that are too small to be worth building buildings for, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe we should contemplate the fact that, all right, we probably shouldn't be building a building there.
What that is saying, given the size of the state, we're geographically larger than New England with the smallest population in the union. You're going to have small schools and small school districts. There's no way around it. Just the nature of the geography here. We need to move on. Mr. Farmer, do you have any further remarks you want to make before we go to somebody else?
No, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else?
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman,
ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, maybe it's a good idea to ask LSO how many people we have in the waiting room that want
Yeah,
to testify.
okay, that is a good idea. How many will there be?
yeah, Mr.
Alice.
Chairman, we have Superintendent Balo and Mr. Mullen. So we have 2 people at this point in time.
Okay, and our instructions here to go to the people that are present here first. So we're going to do that, but we'll leave plenty of time.
Okay.
And I'll yield to the superintendent if you wish, but
Okay, is that all right with you, Margaret?
absolutely.
Okay, committee, Superintendent Balo. LSO, can you admit them? LSO, can you?
Yeah, she's in the room, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, would you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? I'm not quite sure.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Rothfuss. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this resolution to the public and to the legislative body. This has been a hearty and heartfelt debate so far this morning, and I'm sure there's more to come. As you'll recall, Mr. Chairman, I addressed this issue during your respective caucuses prior to the legislative session starting. And of course, all of our preference is that the same revenue stream that has improved, rebuilt, or built over 80% of our schools in the last 2 decades continues. But unfortunately, this bill is before us because that's not the situation. And this is a reasonable entry point to continue to have the discussion and make decisions about our dire school funding situation. And Mr. Chairman, I agree with you that the people of Wyoming have a strong and sensible voice, and this issue belongs on the next general election ballot. Our historic stream for capital construction of schools has diminished significantly, no surprise to anyone. And today it's difficult to even estimate the costs. The people's willingness, as well as the people's willingness to share the burden of building and maintaining our physical school campuses. So moving forward with this resolution really does provide a path to determine to determine the unknowns, the costs, and the willingness of Wyoming people, to bring the issue to light. And most importantly, it allows the people of Wyoming to weigh in and determine the best course of action for school construction. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would answer any questions, engage in conversation, or happy to sign off and join the rest.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering, I think it was a little dated, but I recall something like a 2015 study that maybe the Department of Education has talking about the impact that facilities have on quality of instruction. Do you happen to have any kind of reports that just, I want to make sure that we understand the nexus of what, I think kids need to be in safe, clean environments. But beyond that, I believe the study I read, and it was a number of years ago, suggests that really outcomes in schools is about having quality teachers. Do you have any reports that you might be able to share with us?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, yes, we do have information on that, and happy to get that to this body for review. I don't have it in front of me, unfortunately, but we will put that together. And what I can generally say is that that the conclusion is that the physical building does not impact learning to the extent or that perhaps some would think. In other words, there's a threshold. We want to keep students healthy and safe. And one way to do that is to maintain a physical building. But having sort of, luxury or perks or swimming pools beyond that, there is not a lot of data that would suggest that supports improved student outcomes. But we will get you, again, I'm being very general with that because I don't have the information in front of me. And we will get that to you, Senator Ellis, Mr. Chairman.
And I will say you got that to me back when I was writing this, actually before I wrote this version of it, and it was quite useful. And it is very much as you describe it. It says it doesn't really make much difference it doesn't make any difference for the quality of education as long as you meet certain just very low minimums. And I would say that accords with my personal experience as well. Any further questions for the superintendent?
Mr. Chairman,
Ellis.
just a brief comment. And that's my experience as well. My kids are in a very old building, and we want them there because the teachers are outstanding. And that's why we're there, is because we've got wonderful teachers teaching my kids.
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate your coming and we appreciate your testimony. Okay, committee, we'll go back now. Marguerite.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. My name is Marguerite Herman, and I've come simply as a 6-year member of the Laramie County School District #1 School Board. I happen to be vice chairman, but I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone on the board, just as a result of having been through some building decisions. And I will have to say, I think that the best, and maybe it's an unachievable goal, is to remove politics as much as possible and make building decisions based on need. And then that, of course, is easy to say, but then you've got to go back and how is that need? What are the elements of that, and how are they scored and determined? And that, of course, is where the difficulty comes in. And I'd say, I've been watching this process since the 90s, and we've had some good formulas and some faulty formulas, and some that just turned them on its head and changed midstream. Schools that were #1 were number 20. And I remember a time when a representative from Goshen County came in and said, my school needs to be built, and you just put it at number 25 and convince the whole legislature to fund this elementary school. So there's your politics that can be, and Senator Ellis is exactly right. Who makes up the construction department, and how do they do their work? So many entry points, and then ultimately every building decision comes to the legislature, which is where politics thrives and gets things done. So it's sort of baked in, but I think to the extent to which we can reduce it to some knowable elements that make sense, And I will also have to say, I've seen some bond issues in Cheyenne for the school district before this system went into place, but then also for other things. And you talk about politics and then all the divisions in the, by triad or by, just where you live or whatever come to for. So a bond election, in a city this size, maybe not for a small town, that's pretty fraught with politics too. And so I would have to say how you wring politics out of this and make it evidence-based, needs-based, and then make it, of course, highly efficient, because you got your value engineering that, they tell districts to come back with a different design for HVAC or something. So they try to wring all the extra money out of that. And so it's a work in progress, and it's not perfect. I would have to say it can be improved, though. I admit there are probably problems with it, and there are things that can be improved. I think a statewide system doesn't achieve the best chance for equity, the best chance for everybody on the level playing field. The way it's executed now, it has its flaws, but I think they're fixable, and you can work on to get it to that point where a district can say, we're growing or we're shrinking, and in 5 years, here's a plan, let me lay it out. And when we get there, we think we'll have a need for a building by capacity or condition or whatever. I think Laramie 1 has at least half of all the schools at the top 20 needs right now. And so clearly, and then we rebuilt a couple, and part of the things was to enlarge them and to improve them and get the HVAC system up to date, and also move the school office from the center of the building. Remember when we used to do that? We had people walk through the whole building before they got to the office and checked in. That doesn't work anymore. So you got to move things around, put the office up front, have a vestibule. So there are a whole lot of things when we're in the process of rebuilding the school right now. So there are all kinds of ways that we can meet needs, not just new construction. We have one prototype of a school we've used over and over again, saved money that way. And frankly, it saves money, it's efficient, and it's good for us. And so I don't think it has to be fraught with waste and politics. I think we can work on it. It's not perfect now. I think we can get closer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really want to thank you for being here, because you have a very difficult job. We have a large school district. I know that you deal with very many vocal voices with competing interests. You have a very tough job serving on our school board. So thank you for your years of doing that. I think one of the concerns I have, though, with this statewide managed list is it's got its elements of what it'll look at, but it doesn't quantify some of the intangible things that I think are community driven. And so in Cheyenne, we've had this discussion about really wanting to protect our local, our small schools. I love the fact that my kids can walk, but I know years ago when we actually had some opportunity for maybe building some new elementary schools, one of the discussion points was, let's just close these little schools down and build something out further out of town that'll be bigger because there's more acreage. And I know parents in my kids' schools fought that concept because we were very protective of these little schools that we have in our neighborhoods. And to me, that's a factor, a very key and important factor that our community discusses. But to the extent that anyone else outside of Cheyenne cares about that, I don't know, probably not. So that's the problem I have with the statewide list is, as a community, we don't can take those particulars into consideration. And so how do you think the statewide model that we have can really bring in community concerns that to me are really important and valid without having to affect everybody else across the state?
Mr. Chairman, I would have to say, in responding to that, we love our little schools. Hebert, I guess I can go and mention school names here, is a little school with 100 people, 100 children in it. And it's a little school built for 100 children. And I can just about guarantee you, without checking, that the School Facilities Commission is not going to approve a 100-child school, largely because of the efficiencies aren't there. But I would also say the other thing with some of these older schools, and Hebert also is very old, and it's a solid neighborhood school, and people have been going there for generations, the grandchildren of former students. So it's kind of in the same deal. but they fail on, they're not big enough, so they don't have the acreage that the state standards have. And that is kind of, and they're all landlocked because they're all in their residential areas. And so you kind of have to consolidate. And what the plan we have is that Cole and Hebert, both old, both way high on the list, are probably going to have to come together and be a joint school, much to the heartbreak of the local residents. I can hear them saying that. My children and my grandchildren walk to school, and I get it, but they're just, and I will have to say the small schools, as much as we love them, just have outdated systems, and they do need to be rebuilt, but they need to be rebuilt on right-sized lots. And also, I was thinking another thing about there, but anyway, so yeah, we have enforced efficiencies that do come down from the state, and we have to come down on bended knee for everything, all our plans, but you know, fair enough, we have to justify every penny we spend, and I think that's the right way to do it. It also, yeah, I think if you look at per pupil, because small schools are less efficient than big schools, and that's just sort of the math of the thing. And we have to deal with math and economy now. It's expensive. And you know, people have talked about, why don't you buy out, maybe, you know, buy some houses for Deming so that it could, or the idea, combine it with Miller. So there are a lot of solutions out there, but you're right, it's not the status quo.
Mr. Chairman, I think the point I'm trying to make, though, is in Laramie County, we've supported our community college, for example. And we go to the ballot, we make our choice as voters. And I can tell you that people in the community will drive out to the LCCC campus because they want to see what's going on. I voted for that, or I didn't vote for that. I want to check and see what's going on. And so there's that nexus and connection. And I think that's what's kind of missing with the state model we have now, is we never ask the community, where do you want to see a new school built? Do you want it to be in this triad, that triad, this neighborhood, this location? What do you want? And I think if we started asking our voters in our community where their priorities are, they'll tell us. And they'll do the same thing that we do when we approve improvements for our community college. They'll be driving by, no, we want to keep Hebert, we want to combine it with Cole. And those are both in my districts. And they are very important to those neighborhoods and those communities. I understand that completely. But I think that's the question I'm trying to get after. And that's what a local control system of funding would provide, in a way that if we're all equalized statewide, it misses that, because by and large, it likely will be, the school will be built by oil and gas industry or the coal industry, or name your entity that we're trying to get the tax from. So I think that's my concern. I think my goal would be having more community involvement and voice. And I think that would happen if we put it back in the hands of local people to make those decisions.
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond ever so briefly. So I would have to say, first of all, what I kind of fear, and I'm sorry, I apologize for getting into the local, because Cheyenne, our district is kind of unique because we have these, roughly neighborhood triads. And the thought is that what we used to have in the world of school bond issues in the before times was that people on one side of town didn't want to pay for a school built on the other side of town. So it also brought up divisions, whereas Laramie County Community College, that covers the whole college district. So there was that problem of getting people, again, one area to vote for a school on the other. And the other is, I can tell you and you're familiar with the way we cite schools. It's about bus routes, it's about density of population, it's about a whole lot of things other than very real neighborhood pride and wanting to enhance it and everything like that. That it's a very complicated, where's the population coming from? How many roofs are there near South High School? And and the siting of our latest elementary school. It was a very complicated procedure. And, so will the whole community be able to get behind that? Because transportation and buses, as we all know, is a huge piece. And so we have to make that as efficient as possible, increase the walking distances and that sort of thing. So as much as I agree with you, that would be the ideal. Again, trying to be efficient and equitable and make sure that South Triad gets that school they need, where they need it, where it's going to work, may not be a subject for a popular vote. I'm sorry to take up with all this insider talk, but it does show you how a statewide view can kind of correct for some of those local issues.
I will caution you that the statewide view may be, let's not raise our taxes to pay for Laramie County. And having experienced that from Casper quite a bit, I think that's possible. Okay, who else is here that wants to testify? Yes, ma'am. I hate it with these masks. I can't see who I'm talking to.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Cindy Delancey. I'm the president of the Wyoming Business Alliance. I apologize for my late arrival. We've got multiple things going on this morning, but I wanted to just come in and talk with you a little bit and let you know that we stand in support of this bill or Senate file. And for the reason that the status quo, what we're doing right now is unsustainable. And I think we all know that. We keep talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. And this piece of draft legislation gives us a pathway and a vehicle to actually do something about it. So adding transparency and local involvement is always a good thing. We see this bill or the Senate file as doing that. And for those reasons, we stand in support for it. So we all want local involvement until we don't. And we just would encourage you to move this forward. So happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Anybody else here present? Anybody else? So do we have anybody in the waiting room? We do, don't we?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you have Mr. Mullen.
Okay. Let him in and Mr. Mullen proceed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tate Mullen. I'm with the Wyoming Education Association. So we recognize that the components of our model are highly interactive, and we also recognize that the overarching principles of equity apply to not only the model at large, but they also apply to those components. The components of square footage and classroom size are important to our students' education and to their success, which is why they are laid out within that model, within those parameters. Agreed that that there is a threshold in terms of what buildings do in determining student success, but they are a variable that needs to be taken into account. And while there are flaws within our current system, this approach would at best be treating a system that needs to be adjusted, but is based on the principles of equity for a system that may complicate the problem and is not based on equity. So for those reasons, we are standing in opposition to this proposal, and I will take any questions.
Okay. Mr. Mullen, I'm afraid I did not hear part of your last sentence. Could you repeat it?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So basically, we were just saying that we're not sure that this approach is really a step in the right direction. We recognize that the system does need addressed, but we feel that this is more of a step backwards in terms of addressing and assessing equity. You know, I'm curious to see what happens. We know that there is an additional component within the school facilities prioritization that is going to be looked at. I think that there are ways that we can address this, but our concern is that this is not the appropriate mechanism or vehicle to do that.
Okay. Let me raise one question for you. Clearly, we're going to have to do something else about our financing. How would you feel about financing some or all the school capital needs out of school foundation fund?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we feel that the way that this is currently set up is, again, we would not change the way that that is currently set up, and we would not want to fund that out of the school foundation program. We feel that there are adjustments that can be made within the current system to address some of those political issues and to address how schools move on that list. but that is not something we would support.
Committee? Thank you very much, Mullen. I think that covers everybody else, so there's nobody else in the waiting room, is there?
Not at this time. Nobody else has raised their virtual hand.
Okay, very good. Then public testimony is closed. I will make one further remark. We heard a good deal about taking politics out of it. Frankly, it is my judgment that is impossible. That this country is set up as that form of a democracy known as a republic, and the will of the people is ultimately supreme. And in such a form of government, I don't think it's possible to take politics out of it. Politics is how a free people governs itself. And that's any system you've got. It's going to depend at some point on the popular will. Senator Biteman.
Mr. Chairman, maybe we could start by getting rid of lobbyists for education. That might help get the politics out of education right there. Just a joke, just a joke. It's Friday.
I think they are constitutionally protected.
I'm just kidding. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Committee, back on the bill. There was some criticism of the ballot statement. You could add a sentence to it that would say that if the legislature does not provide other funding, then this constitutional amendment would result in a statewide equalization, statewide mill levy. I don't know whether that's necessary or not. It lengthens it, but you could do that. That is implicit in the mandatory equalization. I don't favor that, but you could. Seeing no amendments, any further discussion?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, bill's been moved. Any further discussion? Call the roll, please. Oops, hold a minute on the roll. Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to suggest amendment, but I really do have concerns with the ballot statement. I'm also concerned with the policy, but the ballot statement is the first time I've seen a ballot statement that like presupposes judgments and provides subjective guidance and analysis. And if this does move forward, I think we should spend a lot of time turning the ballot statement into a set of unequivocal facts instead of analysis and conjecture, where I should agree with every word on a ballot statement, even if I disagree with the ballot. Like, you know, if I'm going to vote no, that's okay. But the idea of having a ballot statement where you might not agree with what it says seems to me that that's very much counter to how we write our amendment ballot statements. And I don't have any clear cleanup right now because most of it is narrative instead of fact-based, or again, usually it's a statement of this is what happens if you pass this amendment. And that's not what we have here. So I'm very concerned about the ballot statement, but also concerned about this approach really not being equitable, although as I think stated several times today, I do think there are things that we can do differently that address some of this without necessarily having to change the Constitution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think the ballot statement is honest and truthful and useful, which is not always the case.
I think the fact that we would need to debate the ballot statement is indicative of my concern of the ballot statement.
I will say I'm open. This is, I don't know how far this will get. I think what we'll do by passing it is put it firmly on the agenda for next time. as an option. I don't know whether I can get a hearing over in the other house. I think we've got to do what we think is right. I'm open to other approaches, but I haven't found one that works. Or that can be funded, and we've got to do something else because the current system no longer is financeable. So any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
On Senate Joint Resolution number 4, Senator Beitman,
Aye.
Senator Ellis.
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss.
No.
Senator Salazar. And Chairman Scott.
Aye.
On Senate Joint Resolution 4, 4 ayes, 1 no, do pass.
That's passed. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 138, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill is really straightforward. Every year during election season, I do my due diligence and try and make sure I understand who the candidates are. And inevitably, before I was elected to the legislature and spent so much time working on education issues and current members of our board, I really had no clue who was on the school board. And I remember we had one friend in our neighborhood who really followed education issues for the district, and we'd all call her and ask her for her advice. And so, Mr. Chairman, this is a bill that would allow for a candidate for a school board election to, at their option and at their discretion, to include their party affiliation. And just doing some research about what's happening in other states, I don't know that I've seen another state that would take this approach. There are definitely other states that have adopted mandatory partisan identification on the ballot. And I want to be respectful to the fact that I think some people view governance in a very apolitical way, and maybe they don't identify particularly with one party or another. And so I do want to protect those individuals who have that mindset from, but giving the voters, I think, by not putting your party affiliation, I think that would indicate to voters that maybe that's kind of your mindset. But I think that there are some candidates who are very proud of their party affiliation, both Republican and Democrat. It's a way of communicating, I think, some general principles about your approach to how you view government and governance. And so that's what this bill would do, Mr. Chairman. And in doing a little bit of research, there's not a lot out there about what happens in those states that have mandatorily made school boards partisan elections. There's some studies that suggest it actually reduces partisanship with decision making. I don't want to go so far as to say I believe that. But I think this is an important concept for us to discuss. I had another point and I can't remember what it is, Mr. Chairman. So with that, happy to answer any questions, and I might circle back if I remember what the point I was trying to make.
Questions? Seeing none? Oh, Senator Biden.
Yeah, quick question. I think I know the answer, but just to get verification. So if somebody chooses not to put their identification on there, would it just be blank or would it be independent?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think blank. Or Mr. Chairman, if they identified as an independent, they could put that on there as well.
Gotcha.
That would be my interpretation as well. Okay. Also, do we have anybody in the waiting room who wants to talk on this?
Attendees, could you please raise your yellow virtual hand if you would like to testify on this piece of legislation? Okay, Mr. Chairman, nobody is raising their hand, so I don't think we have anyone.
Okay, thank you. In the audience, anybody want to testify on this, Mr. Farmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association, speaking in opposition to the bill. Just very generally, we believe that school boards are nonpartisan, that they should operate with the best interest of children in mind, without regard to political party. Mr. Chairman, the one other thing I would point out is that nonpartisan elections generally run on a different schedule than partisan elections. And also nonpartisan elections generally are paid for by the entity as opposed to the partisan election, which is generally paid for by the state. I can tell you specifically with school boards, the school district pays for the school board election. We write a check to the school, to the county clerk every year, and that is not the case for the general election for partisan offices. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, just I would say that our opposition is a desire to keep it nonpartisan.
Okay, questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ellis.
Mr. Chairman, how does that work then with county commission races that are partisan?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not clear. How does what part work?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought the distinction you were trying to make were races that are paid for by counties or operated more at the county level versus statewide races, such as legislative and, governor, those types of races. And so I just wanted to make the point, I guess, that county commission races are partisan and those are county level races.
Mr. Chairman, I said that nonpartisan elections run on a different schedule generally. So the primary for the partisan offices are different than the school board, the city council, town council election. And then the school district pays for the school district election, whereas the general primary election is paid for by the state.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Just to follow up to make sure, I want to make it clear how this would operate. Unlike our races where we have a primary and then only the victor of the primary races advances to the general. I think the thinking would be that this would stay on the same schedule. And if in the situation for your school boards, and I know Cheyenne might be a little different with our triads and how things might evolve there, but it usually is the top 3 vote getters, the top 5 vote getters, whatever that number is. I don't think this would alter that at all.
Okay. Any further questions? Thank you very much. Anybody else? Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, Superintendent Boyd Brown has also indicated he's available after Marguerite.
Okay. We've got one after Marguerite.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Committee. Marguerite Herman is speaking for myself, a Board of Trustees member, but also drawing on my League of Women Voters hat, appreciating the difference between partisan and nonpartisan elections, that certainly school board candidates make no secret of, in their campaign materials, make no secret of their political affiliations, loyalties, and that affiliations of all kinds. And that's certainly okay. I would oppose putting it on the ballot simply because of the word trustee. We're not a delegate like a legislator or like a city council member or a county commissioner, though they are not called trustees for a reason. A trustee is, I've always said, perhaps in a little bit of Pollyannish attitude here, that when you walk in the door to the school boardroom, you leave your political affiliations outside, your regional affiliations, the neighborhood and that sort of thing. And you have to think of the whole district as a whole. And without regard to, again, all kinds of affiliations, political and otherwise. And I think putting that on the ballot would, in effect, would somehow compromise that. Again, campaign materials, I think people make no secret of all the affiliations, religious of all kinds, and appropriately so. But on the ballot, I think it represents someone as carrying the platform or whatever of various groups to the job of a trustee, and I think that is counterproductive. That's just my personal opinion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Questions? Thank you. Anybody else? LSO, we have somebody in the waiting room now.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have Mr. Boyd Brown.
Okay, admit him. And Mr. Brown, when you can, proceed.
Mr. Chairman, Boyd Brown, Superintendent, Laramie County School District Number 1. Just wanted to speak on the issue of most trustees are elected nonpartisan, at least from my understanding. I know that there are some other states that do it differently, but I think the politicalness as being a trustee is not important. I think it's important that they are representing all the students across the district. And with that, I'll take questions. I think Chair or Vice Chairman Marguerite Herman did a nice job.
Questions? Seeing
No, I'm good.
none, thank you very much. Alice, is there anybody else?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we have one more here. Go ahead and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Tammy Johnson, and I am representing myself. I was a former board member, Albany County School Board member. I was a teacher for 16 years, and I worked for the Department of Education for 6 years. So about 30 years of experience in education in the state helps me help you understand the importance of nonpartisanship in education. Like has been said before, when we walk into the boardroom to make decisions, we make decisions in the best interest of kids. And I think it's not too hard to be engaged in the election season to understand what the people in your community stand for. I had many conversations with people about what I believed and what I wanted to do for education in Albany County. And then I will tell you, the League of Women Voters hosts a grueling interview session that really lets you get things out on the table. I wouldn't want to see a lot of other affiliations put on the ballot sort of arbitrarily in a nonpartisan election. You could put your religious affiliation, think how that would affect the results. You could put your party affiliation. I have to ask, what positive impact would that have for the children of Wyoming and the children of communities? Being affiliated with a party doesn't necessarily communicate to anyone what their beliefs or what their, how well they're going to serve the children of their community. It merely says what party they align with. And so for that, I think it would be more of an interference in deciding what's best for kids than it would be a help. If there was something about it that was helpful, I might think that it was a good thing, but I can only see that it could be a hindrance to being objective and being doing the best for the kids that come into the classroom every day. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator
Mr. Chairman, I want to be clear. I will never require anyone put their religious affiliation on any ballot for any race ever in Wyoming. That's certainly not the intention. You know, and I've heard this best interest of the kids, and I agree with you. That should be the primary focus. But I think when we run for the legislature, our obligation is to do what we think's in the best interest of Wyoming. And I think our minority floor leader does an excellent job of representing the voice of his party, the voice of his constituents, and brings really important and valuable perspectives for us to consider and debate. And that's what we do. And I don't know that I see much difference in our local school boards. I think you have boards that approach governance in a very different way. I think it really is just about communicating that to voters when they're at the ballot box. So I just wanted to be clear that this is not an intention to put ever religious affiliation, but just wanted to let you know that I think that a lot of people, when they run for school board, have the best interest of kids in mind, but of course they're going to disagree on what that means and how they do make their decisions.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Senator Ellis. I appreciate that. And I would submit to you that I think the voters are well informed about who is on the school board ballot. And, we may disagree about that, but I found that when I ran, that people understood and knew what I stood for. And I don't think that that's an anomaly. I think that's because people care about what's going on in their schools and they want to be engaged. So I don't think a party designation is necessary to get voters engaged. They're smart. They know what they want to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Anybody else? Public testimony closed. Committee, do I hear a motion on the bill?
Move the bill.
Motion is due pass. Discussion. Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. If anything, I'd try and take efforts to go the other direction and diminish the role of partisanship and party and the acknowledgement and recognition in elections. If you could have a ballot with no little R's and D's afterwards, or I's or anything, I think we'd be much healthier, not just as a state, but as a country. George Washington in his farewell address basically said, if if this country doesn't make it, it's going to be because of partisanship and divisivity. If it ever ends, that'll be the reason. That was his prediction. And I look around our circumstances right now, again, both in the state and around the country, and it never occurs to me to think, well, the real problem we've got right now is that we just don't have enough partisanship. We just don't have people looking out for their party interests quite enough. And if we did, things would be better. And here we have a circumstance where, despite the grievances, the challenges, the fights and the struggles, I think our boards of trustees work pretty well right now. And I don't see them as being partisan. Somewhat perhaps, but not as partisan as the state legislature with R's and D's and other entities with R's and D's, where a lot of people, when they show up to the poll, as Senator Ellis said, I'm not sure all voters really spend a lot of time looking into whom they're voting for. I think they find it sufficient to just show up and vote for a letter. I've talked to a lot of voters that said, Chris, boy, I sure agree with you all the time. I never vote Democrat, never will, would never vote for you. But thanks for doing what you do, and I agree with you. Really, I've had that conversation. You wouldn't believe the number of times I've had that conversation. Thank you. Thanks for supporting me. Thanks for supporting folks that think like I do and work like I do. I would never vote for a Democrat. So we actually have a few systems in the state, a few levels of government that they aspire to remain above this bitter partisanship that's just been escalating for the last few decades. And I wouldn't want to sully those that are still aspiring by forcing them to go the partisan route. And I do realize that there's a may. That may is not going to be used. I mean, we have to be realistic. If I'm in a heavily Republican district and I don't put an R after my name, if I put a blank, if I've got 4 R's and a blank, no, R's are going to win. I mean, it's just that easy. And right now, we have a circumstance where you've just got, in that same circumstance, we'll say 4 blanks or 5 blanks, maybe for a couple of seats. If you want to know what separates those individuals at this point in time, unless you just like one of their names better than the next, you're going to have to look into what their backgrounds are, what their experience is. Hopefully you stumble upon their views, figure out which ones resonate with you. And hopefully those views right now for the school board incorporate something about their thoughts on schools and education. It makes it too easy to just go with the letters. And a lot of people are I think, really willing to take the easy route when available. I talk to a lot of people that do struggle, and they always talk about the school board races. You know, I need to know who to vote for because I don't have the letter after the name. I don't know I don't recognize these names. And they're forced to then go to the League of Women Voters, wonderful products of voter information that's distributed, and they have to look those people up. And this would allow the easy route of, I'm just going to go with the party I like to dominate. And I think back to the last election for school board. In my school board district, we had a lot of turnover, actually. I don't even know whether I voted for Democrats or Republicans. I think one of them I probably know. But I cast several votes. There certainly weren't any letters after the name. So I went, and I didn't know them all. I went and I read their statements. I read their bios. I made my decision based on that. And again, not even sure whether I voted D or R, which is great. I wish I had more opportunities to not know and to not have to have the red or blue flags waving over the candidate as the key and then receive all of the campaign contributions and endorsements and placards with vote strict party line. I don't want people to do that on the D side. I don't want people to do it on the R side. I want people to think for themselves based on the issues, based on what's in front of them, based on what's best for their community. And this bill goes precisely in the opposite direction that I would like to see us go.
A personal basis. That having a partisan election would be, and this isn't going all the way to partisan election, but a service the parties have provided is recruitment of candidates. And I know in my district, for the 20 years ago, there were lots of candidates running. That is no longer true. I don't think we had any choice in the last election. And having a partisan element to it, you might get some candidate recruitment. Now, having said that, at the current moment, I'm concerned that our Democratic Party is visibly dying. And I don't know in 10 years whether it or the Libertarian Party is going to be the minority party in the state. I just don't know. It would get some recruitment done, I think. And that could be quite useful because if you don't have choice, you don't have a really functioning democracy. So I'm going to vote for the bill for that reason. But I don't necessarily encourage, I don't know what the rest of you are experiencing in your district. Senator Biteman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I see in my district, when I hear from my constituents, is frustration with, they don't know who these people are. They don't know anything about them. We have maybe 1 or 2 candidate forums, if we're lucky, and each candidate gets maybe 2 minutes to speak. And that's the gist of, they're basing their whole decision on that if they don't know the person personally. And yes, there is politics in education. We see it every day down here. We see the current position of the education establishment as digging in their heels, fighting the status quo and just wanting to raise taxes and everything will be fine. That's a political position, raising taxes. And that affects local districts, and local school board members do have to have an opinion on taxation policy, and their opinion should be known to the voters and where they stand and how they're going to vote. So I think it's good to have this option, and it's good to help educate the voters and alleviate some of the major frustrations that I hear from my constituents is that they don't know anything about these people and where they stand on key fundamental political issues of the time. Thank you.
Anything else? Right, do we hear a motion on the bill? Motion is due pass. Seeing no further discussion, call the roll, please.
On Senate File 138, Senator Biteman,
Aye.
Senator Ellis. Aye. Senator Rothfuss,
No.
Senator Salazar. Aye. And Chairman Scott.
Aye.
On Senate File 138, 4 ayes and 1 no, do pass.
Okay. Committee, on Monday, we're going to take up Senate File 127. That adjourns the formal committee meeting, but let me ask you to stay put. We've got one other item. Can you pass this down, Tim? Wanted to alert the committee. I have got a amendment to the budget bill on third reading that is a section 300, and wanted to just let people know what was in it. It is a much condensed version of the recalibration bill we voted yesterday. It has some key provisions in it. We're changing the teacher numbers and the class by the class size route, same as we did in the recalibration yesterday. We are making them a categorical grant, so they can't be any reductions. You can't penalize the teachers and to protect The rest of it, that's same as in the recalibration bill. The transportation provision that's in the recalibration bill, the 90% of the pre-COVID year, that's there. We're getting rid of the rolling average, going to a single year. And these are all one-year provisions being in the budget bill. And then the getting rid of the insurance payments for people that aren't using it, that's there too, same as in the recalibration bill. And the teacher increase that was in the recalibration bill is here. The net budget effect is a reduction of 120.5 million, according to the LSO. So just wanted to alert you that was coming today, so you have a chance to think about it. I will solicit your support, all of you. Chris, a chance to redeem yourself.
I'll contemplate it, Mr. Chairman. I'll think about my redemption.
But that's what it is, and it's designed to put that in there so that that is considered. I have difficulty voting for the budget itself unless we do something about the excesses in education, and that's a good part of what motivates me to bring this. So we don't really have the time for discussion, but I wanted to let you all know that that was there and that was coming. Okay, that takes care of it. Thank you.